It's just after I see a movie, I like to go get a piece of pie and talk about it. It's sort of a little tradition I have. Do you like to get pie after you see a good movie?
Hey everybody, welcome back to A Piece of Pie, the queer film podcast. I am here in Max's living room with Max and Matthew doing our first in-person recording in over a year. Thank you so much for having us, Max, and thanks so much for joining us. I'm so excited about this.
Woohoo! All right, in person.
We are covering, and after a month of queer films and pretentious art films, we've thrown all that out the window, and we're covering 2003's Identity, starring John Cusack, and Matthew McConaughey's Serenity, not the Joss Whedon Serenity, which Max and I have not seen. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk Identity first, because it came out first. Then we're going to pause. We're going to watch Serenity, which is going to be something else.
Well, we're having an old-fashioned pizza party.
Yeah, absolutely.
And beer
absolutely.
and wine, so we'll be well prepared for this double indemnity.
Yeah, and I'm so
Double
excited for Serenity, so we should get started on talking about Identity, which we've kind of been doing all night. Anyone want to break down sort of the premise?
Sure. I think it's also worth noting just in advance that part of the pairing, part of the reason going into the pairing for these two movies is that they both contain kind of last quarter jaw-dropper twists. So we will be talking about twists here. It's worth seeing both of these movies in their own right, so please do. If you don't care about the twists, listen on. But yeah, that's, I think, something that just should be acknowledged up front.
Yes, you're right.
Serenity... Oh man, it's so hard to sell Serenity as a concept without just telling people you're going to be in for some stupid shit, and it's fantastic. So if you haven't seen it yet, or don't read about it, go watch it. If you want to be spoiled, listen on. That's all I'll say.
Yes.
That is a really good point, because these twists are bananas.
Yes.
These are the reasons for these movies. And I know I'm a big fan of Identity because it gets so ridiculous, and we're about to watch Serenity later, Brian. But this one, Matthew, you brought to the table. You had seen this. You want to kind of build a cult around it, or find the other cult people that are available for this. And so when you brought this to Brian and me, we were trying to think, what's another one of those rug pullers? One of those big, movies, but not necessarily The Matrix or an M. Night Shyamalan. What's one that's kind of similar to something that doesn't even appear in the trailer that they want to give away? And it took us a little while until we were just like, Identity.
Indeed. Yeah, I think that was you. Max. You thought of Identity. And yeah, like I said, it's without going into the twist before the plot is pretty standard. It starts off like, a sort of Agatha Christie narrative of like a whole bunch of strangers meet at a strange place and they start dying one by one.
She has even an adapted story credit, so they're sticking to the classics.
Does she really?
Yeah.
I didn't notice that. That's hilarious.
And Then There Were None was the original.
Yes.
It's also been 10 Little Indians in a few movies throughout the years, but this one is, I think, maybe the 7th or 8th film adaptation of that story.
I mean, it's a fun and easy concept, and like Kenneth Branagh just did his own
Murder on the Orient
Express. Thank you. And he has another one coming out soon, co-starring Armie Hammer, so that should be interesting.
He is playing the villain role, right?
Oh, I don't know, probably. But anyway, so Identity, like I said, it starts off with that kind of pretty straightforward narrative. Actually, I shouldn't even say it starts off with that. It starts off with a prisoner being wheeled into a hearing late at night that his lawyers have called together.
It's a psychiatric hearing. It's like smacking of Arkham Asylum in the middle of the night in a thunderstorm.
The judge, the dad from Donnie Darko, is like he's the judge and he's presiding over this case, and this man has been convicted of murdering several people several years before. And they found new evidence the last minute, hours before his execution. So that's where it opens, and then we flash to this hotel. It's raining in the middle of nowhere, and that's where the stranger starts to come together, and it starts to intercut with the prisoner, and it sort of the mystery sort of deepens until it's, I guess, spoiler alerts have been stated. You find out it's all in the man's head. And that there are split personalities that got together to murder each other.
What a party.
Yes, and it's not clear initially what the relationship between these two frame narratives is. As Brian said, that there is one part of this movie that's taking place in this examination room where they're sort of reassessing the the logic of assigning the death penalty to this guy who is being argued to have been criminally insane and didn't understand the crimes he was committing. And then there's also just the secondary meat of the movie, which is these strangers united by coincidence stuck in this motel by a storm that has flooded the perimeter, who are assembled with no seeming reason, completely by accident, and then they start dying off one by one. It's sort of a conventional slasher narrative. And like I said, there's no real apparent link between these two narratives, and you start trying to guess, okay, is it a flash forward? Is it a flash back? Is it, there's all of these different apparent reasons for this connection. But as Brian said, we find out that all of the motel action is happening in the killer's head. These are all aspects of his personality that are, in the process of therapy, I think, warring for dominance as the prime personality to consolidate into one personality.
This is all very scientifically sound.
Oh,
They've
absolutely.
written so many papers after this movie. It's been cited. And that's really just our first rug pull.
Yeah. Well, no, there's even, I think, several rug pulls before that.
Yes.
Because you only find out, I would say, the movie's 90 minutes long, you find out maybe about 75 in that it's all in his head. But before that, there are all of these central questions about who is killing people in the motel. It flips from character to character. There's one character who is an escaped convict, or not an escaped convict, who is a prisoner who is...
Jake Busey.
Yeah.
That's how you know it's early 2000s.
There's a prisoner who's brought in by a police officer who, in another rug pull, turns out to be actually another inmate who is just posing as a police officer. But so you kind of run the gamut throughout the movie of guessing who's guilty, who looks guilty. The person who looks most guilty is actually just turning up dead, so now there's another prime suspect. There was a murder weapon found in somebody's apartment. So it's totally...
Just red herring after red herring.
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
And then we find out that they're being murdered in order of their keys and in their rooms. So, you're right. In 90 minutes, this really just throws most of these cliches and things at you pretty quickly. But, the fun part is that it really kind of takes it seriously. It knows that it's not very smart, but it's going to have a fun time with it.
Yeah.
And it just keeps piling up until we finally find out, after this war of dominance happens between all of these, and John Cusack as the limo driver persona, sacrifices himself for the hooker with a heart of gold, and she goes and works on a farm, and then we realize there's a little bit left in the movie, and it's like the prisoner is being driven away to like a peaceful estate, until we find we're indulging in the evil kid narrative, and it's actually he was the murderous. Timmy was the murderous kid all along, and ultimately wins, and the prisoner, Pruitt Taylor Vince, pulls a Hannibal Lecter and jumps out and takes over the van, and that's where our movie ends.
In another sort of soundbite moment that is up there with the highest echelons of movie quotes, where he says, "Whores don't get a second chance," and then strangles the escort driver.
I have a suspicion, though, that after he kills both of those cops, and he's still stuck in the van, he's still stuck in the back seat of that van. And maybe he just dies of dehydration several days later.
Possible.
But this movie doesn't exactly have a lot of verisimilitude.
Right,
so
no, of course not.
I have a feeling that he's
you
driving away
talked about
to his next spree, or maybe ends up in the sequel to Con Air.
You talked about briefly John Cusack, and it's worth mentioning this cast because, again, we're talking about how crazy the plot is. We have a cast that works for it to get us there, and credit to James Mangold, the director. I think with another filmmaker, this goes completely off the rails, and I think he knows that the script is stupid. Looking over the writer's other credits, I don't think the writer thinks it's stupid.
No, I think the writer takes it very seriously.
Yeah. But James Mangold knows what movie he's making, and he cast accordingly. But the cast: John Cusack, Ray Liotta, John T. McGinley, Alfred Molina, Amanda Peet, John Hawkes, Rebecca De Mornay, Clea Duvall, Lila Kenzel, fresh off of Mad About You, which I'm sure neither of you watched, but I remember watching as a kid.
Oh, I remember.
And I was like, oh yeah, she was Richard Kine's wife on Mad About You. Yeah, and it's just they each play kind of these archetypes. There's the former cop, now limo driver. There's the spoiled actress in Rebecca De Mornay. The young married couple that just got married, and they have their own secrets, and that's another red herring. Are they, at first, because they kind of just come in together, and it's you just kind of learn more and more about them as the
our creepy motel manager straight from
Yeah.
Psycho. Of
Yeah,
John
yeah.
Hawkes,
Turns
you
out to
know?
turns out to be a failed gambler, and like every character has a moment that like is a red herring, is a like rug out from under you. Even, and I think Ray Liotta's was the last one where you learn that he's actually a prisoner with Jake Busey.
Right. I feel like the whole movie is just this never-ending sequence of plot twists that each one feels like it's going to be the conclusive one that is going to seal the deal of who the murderer actually is, who is this faceless patient that we've heard so much about for the first half of the movie, and every time there is this rug pull that results only in more questions, it turns out to be actually quite irrelevant to the plot. I mean, there's all of this stuff that, I mean, is ultimately made irrelevant because it's revealed that these are just, like Brian said, these archetypes that are doing battle in the prisoner's head at the end. But yeah, there's all of these different reveals. The motel owner, for one, being a total imposter. We learn that towards the end. He's a guy that just sort of showed up at the motel weeks earlier and found the motel owner dead in a bowl of soup or something, and just continued doing the job. So all of these sort of pieces of evidence that pile up and sort of go nowhere but contribute to this ever, mutable sense of what the actual twist in this movie is. And then the final twist, that this is all in someone's head and in kind of this split personality scenario, is like way dumber than any of these film noir Agatha Christie, sort of tropes that we've been playing with for the whole movie. So it really does catch you by surprise. It did for me anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for a movie that indulges so long within more of its theatrical roots, within really grappling with an Agatha Christie story, even if it's taking a bunch of other movie genres in, the cop story, the prisoner story, psycho, a horror movie, a slasher, it really becomes something almost science fiction by the end of it, by having all of them do battle together, and for the sole Highlander personality battle of it. I can tell you, I did not expect what was coming when I first saw this in 2003. I think listeners know me. I worked at Gurney Mills around this time. This, I think, is becoming a millennial cult hit. I think there's a lot of people our age, Brian, that saw this around the time, and it's not exactly a great movie, but it's got this stickiness. It kind of sticks in your memory. Enough crazy things happen. It's got that great cast. And I do want to give a shout out to James Mangold, too. We were talking just a little bit beforehand about how he might just be, America's best journeyman director. That he is just able to take, material or comic book material or a lot of pulp and really put it out well in earnest. So, he did Wolverine and Logan and 3:10 to Yuma and most recently Ford versus Ferrari. So the guy knows what he's doing with the story. Girl Interrupted all the way back in 1999 too. So you got to imagine that he took this and knew how ridiculous this was going to be and how popular around this time in 2003 these pretty junky slasher movies were becoming, and really gave it its all, which again I think makes a very enjoyable experience by the end of it. And I don't know, it's maybe me guessing just because it's not necessarily seen in any new critical lens, but it feels a little bit like a queer movie. I think any movie that grapples with identity and, like you said, very specifically dealing with characters that have taken over roles or are playing a different role, or that, both feminine and masculine within this person's head, and ultimately, is supposed to end the film with a female character, but then is taken over by this child murderer again. That I don't know. At least it feels kind of gay.
There is a thought that I had while watching the finale to this, where in that sort of penultimate scene where it seems like the final girl has taken over as the dominant persona, and it seems like you're going to have a happy ending until, of course, the murderous child comes through. I was like, this is so funny. This is not what the final girl usually looks like, is, a heavy-set balding man, because the final girl is the persona that, sort of lives inside his head, but we see flashes to the external reality where, he's speaking these doubled lines that she's speaking. Something like, I always wanted to go and live at the orange grove or something, and he's saying it with kind of this feminine affectation that is, I'm not sure I would say it has queer legibility so much as it does, or rather, let me rephrase that. I wouldn't say that it's inherently queer so much as it has queer legibility. I definitely think that is something sort of working within the movie, but I'm also kind of curious as to how much we can say that about really any kind of narrative of neurodivergence. I feel like we see that a lot in terms of tropes of people with split personality or people with some kind of general. I mean, you look at Psycho. Psycho is a definitely
granddaddy.
queer legible movie,
And don't get us started on Brian De Palma movies soon after this, between Raising Cain and Dress to Kill and Sisters, and yeah, it's definitely a well they go to often.
Yeah. So I mean, it's a curious sort of thing for me. I think split personalities are typically they exacerbate they exaggerate this sort of dissonance of having a male character speak with a feminine persona to show like, wow, this person really is crazy. They really do sort of inhabit these personalities that are not sort of intrinsically evident in them. And so I feel like that's always going to be kind of queer coded. But I do think it's worth mentioning. Yeah, it's just sort of also another trope in portraying crazy people in film.
I think the queerest thing about this movie is Clea Duvall.
She generally always is.
I know. I like that reading. I don't think that these guys were going for that. I think that's like it's definitely, like you were saying, like it's a trope used in dealing with mental illness more so than
This is more of a reference on another movie. Like this is one that takes a lot of shorthands and doesn't obviously have a lot of thought in its head, other than we are going to barrel through this plot and we are just going to keep you at least entertained or guessing up until the last second. And you know what? Tell you the truth, I miss a lot of movies like this. You know, like this came out in 2003 when there was always 60 new movies at the multiplex to see. You could always have your big choice rather than just going for like the few Disney or Marvel or corporate type of properties. Were these mid-grade movies, it was made for $15 million and it made nearly $100 million. Where like movies could be made on a small budget and make a lot of their money back that, were fun to watch and you didn't have to think about too hard afterwards.
I feel like this would be on Netflix now.
Totally. Well, and that's something that I really appreciate about both this movie and Serenity is that because of their absolute batshit insane twists, they are impossible to franchise. Because, I mean, not just in terms of like commercial viability, but just because of where the world of the film is left by the end of this really weird metaphysical twist at the end of the movie. Yeah, there's no going forward from this. Okay, maybe you could say, okay, where does he go now that he's got the one kid? Oh God, that was going to sound bad. Now that he is... listeners, you can probably guess what I was about to say. Now that he has the dominant kid persona in him, where does he go from there? Will he continue his serial killing streak? But it's like, once you've established this as kind of your spectacle blowout and in the film's existential, stakes, it's like, yeah, there's really it's franchise poison. You can't really go anywhere from there.
The field has been burnt and salted.
Yes,
the twist has been twisted.
Yeah, I want to say though that, and I like I said, I think it's a well-made movie. I think James Mangold does the best that he can with it, and I think the actors everybody kind of knows what movie they're in. But like, as much as that works on the surface, like I found myself like I don't like this movie. It's so stupid. I'm just like watching it. I'm like, this is so stupid.
It is made by straight people, where it's just it's constantly dark, both literally and figuratively.
Yeah, like this is the best version of that script, I think.
Yeah.
But like, and seeing it, I saw it in the theater in 2003 as well. I get bored with all of the rug pulling. Where it feels like you don't really trust anything. And it can be fun, like, in moderation, but I always find this movie just kind of does it in overkill. That said, I have found as much as I don't like it and I think it's stupid, I've seen it more times than I care to admit. Because if I find it on TV, I'll watch it, and I'll be like, I fucking hate this movie.
It lends itself to a certain drunken, stoned curiosity.
Absolutely,
sure.
Yeah. It has that, and it has a bunch of actors that I really like, and they make it palatable and watchable, but we're really digging into a movie that there's nothing there.
Well, so there is something that I absolutely adore about movies, again, like both this and Serenity, that have just kind of the audacity to do the stupidest shit, but have no sense of like self-critique or reflexivity. So you'll have a scene, and I think this is to your point, Brian, where it's just a very stupid movie, where you have this scene where it's revealed that the kid is actually the killer persona this whole time, and so it's showing flashbacks as to how he orchestrated all of the deaths leading up to this. And there was a death where I think it was two people were in a car and they were trying to escape. And the car just sort of seemingly explodes, and at the time you have no idea what caused it. And in sort of the flashback reel where they're showing how
Right,
the kid
right.
actually orchestrated all of these things, they dead-ass have a cool guys don't look at explosions moment with this little, like, 6-year-old kid staring, stone-faced, walking away from this explosion, walking away like
It's
a
so
badass.
funny.
It's hilarious, and they don't play up the humor at all either, and that's why
That's
I
what
think
it makes
the
it so
movie,
funny.
that is why this movie is outstanding. And with Serenity too, as we'll see, they just commit like wholeheartedly to the pathos of what is a completely just patently stupid premise, and that is what makes these movies just outstanding cinema in my mind. It's an authenticity that you don't get with sort of the Joss Whedonized, Marvel Cinematic Universe, where everybody feels like they have to comment on something. There's this insecurity around premise where people feel like if it's not believable, they have to immediately make it known that, oh, I know this isn't believable. Did that just happen? Wow, okay, we're just gonna go with that. Something is just so admirable about a movie being authentically stupid, and I love, love, love that. Both of these movies for that reason.
Matthew, I 100% agree with you. I respect something like this so much better than half of like the direct that Disney or DC or anything else puts out, because it's doubling down. It's doubling down on just like, we're taking this earnestly. We're telling this goddamn story, even if like the script needed about 7 more polishes. When I first saw this in 2003, I think I'd called it the script that Donald Kaufman wrote, and I still believe that that's true, because the adaptation had just come out in 2002, and the plot of that movie is Charlie Kaufman has his fake twin brother, Donald Kaufman. He's struggling writing his screenplay about the orchid thief, and his brother decides, oh, I can write a screenplay too, I'll talk to your Hollywood friends, and ends up writing a screenplay about a cop, a victim, and a serial killer called The Three. And his big twist at the end of it was, dun dun dun, they're all the same person. And immediately he gets the thing sold for like $3 million. He like shows up his brother almost immediately by creating something so dumb. But if you've seen the movie, like, Donald Kaufman is like the best character in the film. He's confident, he doesn't care, he's nice, he's actually sweet. And I do admire that that's that type of feeling of this, that's just kind of like, listen, like, it's a fucking movie. We're having fun here,
Yeah. There's something to the acting, too. I mean, yes, these characters are all very clearly archetypes. That's something that is made all the more literal once we figure out that, yeah, they are in, like, almost a Jungian sense, right? That they are these fractured elements of his identity. But even before that, going into this with the expectations of what we typically see in a slasher movie, we know these characters are going to be archetypes. We know there's going to be, like, the whore, the final girl, the skeeve, like all of these different people, and they don't have to be fully fleshed out. And I think the movie rides this really fine line between giving them just enough characterization to make them interesting, usually right before they're killed, but keeping them, mostly as symbols.
Mm-hmm.
And they're symbols that are really fun to play with. They're totally not overwrought in a way that becomes too unbearably corny. They're just, I think Jake Busey's character, right? He is the perfect example of this. He's on screen for a total of maybe like 8 minutes.
Maybe.
Yeah, and he's everything that you would expect Jake Busey as a chaperoned murderer to be. It's excellent.
He's hitting repeat on his Contact performance and a bunch of... No, you're right, Matthew. I mean, I'll just say quickly, like, that was the theatricality that I meant of, like, when it really embraces its stage kind of roots here. It reminds me of being, like, in bad plays in high school that I had a lot of fun, where it's just like, you have 5 minutes, you let your costume and you let your 2 lines about who you are and I'm a businessman do your talking for you, and that's all the time you got on stage before you're killed off.
So one thing that we were talking about a bit before we hit record that I was really curious about is just how this movie was marketed. Because it's so difficult to try to sell people on this movie. I was trying to, with the friends that I'm staying with, sell them on this movie without giving away the big twist that, oh, you're going to have to see this because, oh, I can't really tell you. It's a slasher. It's kind of like a mystery, but I can't really tell you why it's so good. And so we ended up watching the trailer. I believe it was the theatrical trailer, yes? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it ended up... well, Max, how would you describe the trailer in terms of how they sold this movie, premise-wise?
It seemed like straight fastball down the middle, like slasher thriller. They gave a few hints, but it was weird to see that John Cusack was narrating it and like seemed to be in a hospital setting. Like they were giving kind of clues that something was somewhat amiss to this regular type of story, but they really gave away nothing other than here's some of these cast members. We're definitely doing the 10 Little Indians type of approach here. come and see this movie. There's no other hint of a larger twist to be had. And like I said before, at this time in 2002 and 2003, these movies were becoming a dime a dozen. The post-Scream era and, 6 or 7 horror movies a year.
I just find that question interesting because I feel like it belongs to a canon of movies where people will review them. They'll, the early reviews will come in and everybody will say some variation of, don't read anything about it, just walk into the theater. And that's how I encountered both of these movies. With Identity, I had no reference point outside of reading some Reddit thread when I was in high school about, mindfuck horror movies. Horror movies that will totally catch you by surprise. Don't read anything about these ones. And I went into it completely blind. I got, the DVD off of Netflix, and I was, even though I was primed going in, hunting for the stupidest possible conclusion I could get to, I still didn't get the twist. And that's how I went into Serenity, too. I think I read a Letterboxd comment when it came out, or a bevy of them, saying, listen, this is not a good movie. It is almost so bad it's a good movie, but you can't read anything about it. You have to go see this in theaters, on a big screen. And I did, and I'm so grateful that I did so. But so it comes back to the question, how do you market these movies, both as somebody who is working in the movie's favor and trying to market it to get a wide audience on release, but also just as a person who is trying to build a cult of appreciation for these movies? How do you market it to friends? How do you tell people you have to see this movie? No, I'm not going to tell you what it's about. You just have to watch it. Is there a sell for these that doesn't rely on breaking that seal?
I would like to believe, at least for people like us, anyway, that, if you said that to me about a movie, I would probably just go ahead and watch it. And then same with you, Max, and, Rob, and anyone who's probably ever been on the podcast, I would say that about. If they were don't read about it, you're going to love it, just watch it. Actually said that to me about Parasite before I saw Parasite. And I had already seen the trailer, and I already wanted to see it, but when he said that, he was and I was okay, I'm not going to read it
Same with
anymore.
me. We went to go see that together. We were we actively have avoided reading anything about this.
Yeah.
Although that was the same year in Cannes where Quentin Tarantino got in trouble saying that. Where at the same time, you had to... But that was also the same time Bong Joon-ho was just very quietly also saying, yes, but please don't spoil Parasite either.
Yeah.
So I do, when I was thinking about that, Matthew, was just oh, sure, there are plenty of movies that come with these twists. Those are 2 recent examples where the filmmakers tried very hard, but they are also being their own carnival barkers, too. To be kind of you got to stay for the last 20 minutes of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. You really got to stick it in, don't let anybody tell you. Or that it was so, I think for the first 2 weeks when that movie came out, the Wikipedia page was nothing but fake spoilers. And I remember reading some of those for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, though, too. So I think that there's so much more internet culture that gets in the way, or there's so much that attracts people to know even if they don't care about it. Whereas when this came out in 2003 in Identity, if a movie critic wasn't spoiling it in a review, you wouldn't know, or unless your friend blabbed or anything else. So it was much easier to go into something completely not in the know.
Roger Ebert did a good job of reviewing it without revealing anything, and he gave it 3 stars. He gave it a solid review.
Well, it reminds me, too, even just the word of mouth spoiler, it goes as far back as, Diabolique. I remember that movie ends with an intertitle right after the twist, basically telling people, I think what they say specifically is, don't be diabolical. Don't tell people how this movie ends. But, I feel like you also see that in a lot of old-timey advertising for...
That's a William Castle thing,
totally.
Too. But it's that Carnival Barker approach to be kind of don't tell anybody, a wink, a wink, a wink.
Right.
Yeah, it is one of those things of it's tough. It's tough to sell a twist movie, I think, in a very spoiler age, but if you're doing it, you're building that into kind of its premise.
Yeah.
And some of them can win huge awards, like those 2 movies, and some of them can be like Serenity, that obviously pleased nobody and made no money.
I saw the trailer for Serenity, and I was oh, I have no interest in seeing that, and kind of laughed it off or whatever, didn't really give it any thought. And then when it came out, I started reading, about how bad it was. I was oh, I want to see what this twist
Club
is.
review. I remember when that first came out for Serenity, that was gave it, I think a C- or D, but it was just but wait, there's something in this that you will never expect, and it's so crazy that we admire it. Yeah. And I clicked on it, and so I do know what's coming, Matthew, although I won't say it for right now until we start talking, because I let my curiosity get the better of me.
I did the exact same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so that's the thing, and I feel like it's always a double-edged sword, because when you go into a movie primed to expect a twist, of course your mind's just going to be racing the whole movie, and what often happens for me is I'll think of increasingly stupid twists, and then the actual twist is never going to be actually as satisfying, ridiculous, bombastic, to live up to the crazy shit that I worked up in my mind. Serenity was one of the few movies where I thought of something, thought, that's way too stupid to be the twist, and it was the twist. And I was like, oh, okay, that's both disappointing and absolutely mind-blowing at the exact same time, which is why it's one of my favorite movies to this date.
And honestly, like, it was not a movie I ever had any intention of seeing. Right. And we're watching this for the podcast because I feel like since it's come out, Matthew, you have been like, you have to talk about this movie. And you're in town, you're visiting, you live in San Francisco, and so it's a special occasion.
Well, I've been going around straight up proselytizing this movie basically ever since I saw it, and I've been looking for an excuse to badger Brian into doing it on the podcast, and honestly, I can think of no better pairing than Identity, because they're both, as we've talked about, they're both these movies that sort of rest on kind of the highest concept twists you can imagine, and play it entirely straight. And they're movies that sort of, a lot of their appeal, which is not to say that they have, well, Serenity might not have merits all of its own. It's certainly got a whole lot of weird shit in the batter, but I'd say Identity stands on its own as a very competent, sort of self-contained, non-franchisable slasher movie, and it just also happens to have a really batshit twist. But the pairing here, I think, is just so excellent because, both of these movies really kind of live or die on their twist, and the twist is so out there. So, yes, I'm more than excited to be talking about both of these movies in comparison.
Well, I'm ready for some Anne Hathaway femme fatale action.
Oh,
yes.
Well, this is another one where the trailer, I remember the trailer, seeing it before a movie, and being like, Anne Hathaway, Matthew McConaughey, fishing. Oh, this could get interesting. And then by the end of the trailer, it doesn't seem interesting. So again, kind of went to the back of my mind until I got baited with all of these. But should we try to listen to this trailer, see if it gives any clues away before we talk?
Oh, yes, please.
Yes, absolutely. So we're going to play that, and then we're going to, on our end, we'll be watching Serenity, because Max and I, despite knowing the twist, have never seen it. And Matthew, of course, has seen it. So enjoy the trailer, and we'll see you on the other side.
Around here, they like to say, everybody knows everything. But what if the truth was, nobody knows anything?
I got a feeling today is the day.
Today is the day. I can feel him this time. I can feel him.
Good to see you, John. Took so long to find you. What do you say?
Say I'm not called John anymore.
It's funny, huh?
Where would you want to find me?
My husband has never seen your face. You were right about him.
He's violent with you. What's this?
Just a little scratch.
Little scratch, huh?
I want you to take him out on your boat and drop him in the ocean for the sharks.
They say she came all the way to see you?
Yes, it's about temptation. There's right and wrong.
No. In Plymouth, everybody knows everything.
Well, I've got kind of a big day tomorrow.
I know all about your big day.
Feels like everybody knows something I don't. How do you explain that?
Dill, will you have yourself a good day now and do what's right, okay?
I need you to deliver me from temptation.
Are you going to take him out?
You're not right in your mind.
My wife says you're being a little difficult.
There's something wrong.
You're gonna tell me what this is all about? Sometimes we do bad things for good reasons.
All right, welcome back. That was the trailer for Serenity. We just finished watching Serenity. What are your thoughts, Max?
I'm going to pass this one off to Matthew first.
No, we know Matthew saw it. This was Matthew's movie. Matthew brought this to us. What are your thoughts?
I just had a good time watching this. It's been a while since watching movies in person with friends, so that's a new enjoyable experience for us again. But one that was just rode what a weird tightrope between camp and pure earnestness and just bad movie and bad good movie, but mostly just bad movie. It really contained much more than I was even hoping for.
Brian.
I kind of am feeling I'm left. So I knew the twist. The twist being was that.
Do we want to give a quick plot synopsis first?
Yeah, we can do that. Why don't you do that?
Sorry, that's what I meant to kick it over to Matthew for a quick plot.
But it's your movie, so you give us the plot description, and then we'll throw it back to me.
Sure. So Matthew McConaughey plays sort of a grizzled fisherman living on a nondescript island that is sort of supposed to be somewhere in the Caribbean. It's called Plymouth Island. And he lives this sort of idyllic tropical life wrought with alcoholism, where every day he's on like a Moby Dick quest to catch this one specific tuna fish. And he runs this service renting out his fishing boat to tourists so that they can fish for themselves. And he's sort of using that as an avenue to pave his own livelihood and to continue his quixotic quest to catch this one big fish. And his wife re-enters his life. His ex-wife. His ex-wife.
Because at this point, he's mostly just naked or banging Diane Lane.
That's right.
Yes.
As we enter the movie, we just sort of see his everyday, which is the same. He's running this fishing tourism business, drinking a bottle of rum every morning, and trying to catch the fish. His ex-wife comes to the island. She's living large, although she's married a horribly villainous, abusive man, and she comes with the missive that she needs Matthew McConaughey's character for the good of his child who lives with her and the abusive man. She needs him to kill this man by not faking his death, by murdering him and making it look like a fishing accident. And so that's where the story kicks off, and we learn quicker into the movie than I really remembered that things are not all as they seem on the island. There are some weird intrusions. The reality, the logic of the reality starts breaking, and eventually you realize that this entire life on this nondescript island is a simulated world made in a video game that Matthew McConaughey's real son is coding. So Matthew McConaughey's character is nothing but a simulation of the real character who died in Iraq, and the son is trying to go through some sort of therapeutic processing by recreating his father in a revenge porn thriller video game.
Really psyching himself up for murder here.
It's this sort of weird Matthew McConaughey is dead the whole time, Sixth Sense esque.
But plugged into the Matrix.
But then also like if Haley Joel Osment made him up and it was a video game.
Yes.
Yeah. Put that on the poster.
Yeah, right? This movie was bonkers, and I appreciated pairing it with Identity because they are both films that exist purely to be the onion that you keep unpeeling. In both cases, I feel like it's very first draft. They didn't really ever think it through. And so much of it is like, what the fuck is happening? And the filmmaker, we looked it up, it was Stephen Knight. Who has written and directed most of Peaky Blinders, which I've not seen.
Mm-hmm. But has been writing screenplays in Hollywood and beyond for 3 decades now, it looks like. Was even Oscar nominated.
Yeah, he's done some good work, absolutely.
He's done some good work, but has only directed a handful of films.
And I feel like this doesn't find a tone. And by the end, in hindsight, you're like, oh, this should have been more whimsical in nature, given it's like this video game sort of. But he tries to make it this like Miami noir, and that doesn't work. And then it's this sort of body heat sort of, and that doesn't work.
Well, so one of the things that we were talking about while watching this is how much of this camp is intentional, right? And I think what really makes the movie this glorious failure, in my eyes anyway, is that almost none of it feels intentional. It seems like it really is going for this earnest treatise on like philosophy and, you know, existentialism and sort of divine justice almost. You know, it's in conversation.
The fish's name that he's looking for is Justice, by the way.
And it feels like the musical swell and like the lighting and everything with the little boy running down the deck in the arms of his dad. Like, it's this like quote unquote like inspirational movie type of feel where
Dear God, it's almost a Terrence Malick movie.
where like they want you.
It's Terrence Mackerel.
He like wants you to like leave that movie from that moment feeling charmed and swooned, but you're just mostly just sort of confused and confounded.
Yeah, it is a very weird tone that takes place, and I feel like if the movie had been a little bit more self-aware, had played into that video gamey aspect, it wouldn't have been nearly as enjoyable, for me anyway. Because what makes the movie so charming is, you know, like I said before, you know, vis-a-vis identity, that it leans so hard into this incredibly, like, earnest conversation with, like, you know, capital I intellectual texts like The Old Man and the Sea or Rime of the Ancient Mariner and Moby Dick, and it thinks it's on the same level and it's presenting this whole, like, you know, simulacra and simulation kind of thing, and it's throwing all of these ideas at the wall, and it's just so incredibly lowbrow and stupid. But there's something about that just emotional, you know, vigor and honesty that makes the movie, I think, really charming to me. And I feel like if it had taken more of a sarcastic tone, if it had been more a Free Guy, that's the movie that I was thinking of that's coming out with Ryan Reynolds. That's about a guy who realizes he's an NPC in a role-playing video game, which is like, yeah, the more self-aware version of this movie. And that question of tone with this movie, it really never does show its hand in that respect. It lets you in on the twist pretty early, but even then, it never uses that as fodder for comedy or anything even remotely, you know, taking the piss. It's all so straight up.
Yeah, we checked when that reveal happened. I think we were all sort of like, "Oh, this is earlier than we thought," and I think we checked the time, and we were an hour in. So
an hour and 40-minute movie.
Yeah, so we had 40 more minutes to go through. We talked earlier about Identity and how it felt like Donald Kaufman's the script that he wrote. This feels like it could have been his follow-up.
Yeah, it was like, the sophomore effort.
yeah, where it's like you just have a lot of ideas, and you're like, well, it would be cool if this happened, and it would be cool if that happened, and like, I've seen Jaws, and I've seen Double Indemnity, and I want to, you know, and I've seen The Sixth Sense, and now I want to make a movie that combines all of them. Like, it's this weird. It doesn't, like I said, it doesn't settle on a tone, and that I found it hard to like start enjoying. I don't know. I wanted it to be campier or more self-aware, or maybe even like a little less campy or less self-aware, where it was like playing it straight. Because sometimes it felt like it was kind of winky and like, I don't know.
Whenever Anne Hathaway was saying lines, you started to be kind of like, she's got to know. She's got to know what level this script is and where she's at right now. Well, you know, we were trying to look up some of the trivia on this and some of the history, but it's a little bit scanty at this point. Matthew, I believe when the cult picks up a bit more, we'll probably get more of, you know, I think we were discussing some of the CGI shots were starting to look like Birdemic or The Room, or like, it really does have some of like the classic bad movie cult film type of flavors to it, but it does hold back. And, you know, there is this earnestness I do appreciate. I think Brian well knows, you know, I love a good fiasco. I love a good fiasco. More ideas the better is better than less. But this one is, it leaves you guessing. And I think guessing, and, you know, we asked that question early on of like 10 minutes in of like, who exactly is this movie for? Or who did they make it for, too? And ultimately, my guess is that, you know, this might be like a back pocket script, you know, for this writer. You know, he's had success in Hollywood. He's sold a lot of scripts. He's nominated for an Oscar. He's got a couple directing gigs under his belt at this point. I think he looks at this one. He's like, I really want to do this one. This script is special to me. And I really have this in my head. But as a visual artist and the other people, he is not there yet. And as a director of actors, they are all within a different movie. Anne Hathaway is in a different movie. Jason Clarke is definitely in a different movie. Like, there is not the skill sets to put all of these mixed pieces together for this.
I think that dissonance really comes to the fore, and it's what makes the movie so fucking funny to me, because you have what is essentially like pulp or noir dialogue. You know, the characters are all having, I think, Max, you were describing this purple dialogue, where they're all having these really kind of smoky, half-whispered conversations about intense stuff. Max, you also made the observation that Matthew McConaughey does not make eye contact with anybody for like the first 40 minutes of the movie.
These are strong actor choices that are happening.
He's brooding. He's brooding for the whole movie, and Anne Hathaway, as his ex-wife, is also brooding, and they're totally doing these kind of dime airport pulp performances, but it's juxtaposed with them. It's like a very sexy performance, at least in tone. But it's juxtaposed with stuff like Matthew McConaughey chopping up tuna to hook on for bait. And they're talking about catching tuna. They're not even talking about catching a sexy fish.
Finding lost cats.
They're not talking about a shark or a dolphin or anything. It's a fucking tuna. A tuna named Justice. And even more, there's I am so hung up on the question of sexuality in this film. Because, let's cut to the point. Matthew McConaughey is so fucking sexualized in this movie. Not just that he has a great body, but, the DP clearly wanted to fuck him or something. Because just the way that he is framed every single time it's what you would call the male gaze in sort of a conventional sexualization of women if they were shown in the same light. He's wearing these tight, wet, clinging tank tops in pretty much every single fucking scene. He's glistening.
He's
got his
naked.
butt out.
He's wet. He's about to be wet. He is the femme fatale kind of in this film. Really.
He totally is. He goes on several scenes where he takes his sort of morning constitutional and dives into a lagoon, and his ass is above his head as he's swimming down into the depths.
I really did like that. This whole movie's a Freudian nightmare, but that scene where he's in the water with his naked son too, and it suddenly became Nirvana, Jim Henson's Nirvana babies, and this crystal blue water with these naked butts. It was just too much.
Don't worry, it's a vision. It's a vision. It's a psychic trip or something. But I just have to believe that there's this intense sense of not just idealization, right? Because that's always the question when it comes to depiction of burly or muscular guys in these sort of movies. It's okay, how much of this is a fantasy of projection, and how much of this is a fantasy of sexualization? And in this movie, there's no question in my mind that you are supposed to be looking at Matthew McConaughey with just unbridled lust. It's not a question of, oh, he's buff, I want to look like him, he's cool. It's like a pinup. It straight up is from a firefighter's calendar.
It's obviously a writer-director's love of masculinity that just becomes homoerotic because it just cycles back on itself to this degree. But, to your question, Matthew and Brian, we were just cackling at this is not a subtle movie. This is a movie that talks about holding rods and fishing rods and fish and tunas and finding lost pussies all movie long. And it's very clear that it knows it's doing that. It knows that this is living in this, neo-noir, wild things, body heat type of world. But, it is still playing it as completely straight as it possibly can.
Yeah, you needed I feel like you needed a Michael Douglas and a Sharon Stone for this material. Because I just feel like a lot of it, and the success or failure of it relies so much on tone and so much on the performances. And I do think that Anne Hathaway knows what movie she's in, but she's in a different movie than Matthew McConaughey and Jason Clarke and all the other actors. And Diane Lane. Diane Lane also knows which movie she's in. She's done the Adrian Lynn thing. She knows
quite
exactly
well
where she has.
right.
Absolutely, yeah.
And in those early '90s and late '90s, neo noir or Adrian Lynn bodice rippers,
Yeah.
made a lot of money. Were quite popular. I can see where like people were like, we're doing a throwback. We're gonna make this movie. Why this got a budget and a green light.
Yeah.
Also, we were discussing, plenty of like, are there still twist movies and discussing that for Identity, and in between we're just like, oh right, it is still a very popular thing, and M. Night Shyamalan's still making movies, so this all could seem like a good idea. And then you put all of these things into execution, and a Jeremy Strong doing his best Ben Linus impression from Lost.
Yes, thank you for bringing up Jeremy Strong, because as of the day we're recording, the Succession season 3 trailer
we're
dropped.
so excited, Brian.
Yeah, and so it was a delight to see him in that sort of Ben Linus.
But he's the one that ultimately cracks the movie wide open, and then again, quite dramatically, an hour in, that we still have 40 minutes left over. Yeah. And this is where I start turning my head to Matthew and being like, what are we going to get? Is this a parable? Is this going to be a moral type of movie? But then he starts wandering around talking to the non-playable characters for 30 more minutes after we already know the twist.
Yeah, and I feel like the filmmaker, was a Stephen Knight, right? I feel like he does want it to be, he fancies it this sort of like parable. Like I said, with that ending and the swelling music, and he's like, it's a happy ending, but like, he doesn't understand, like I almost feel like he doesn't understand, he saw Adrian Lynn and Brian De Palma films, but didn't understand them.
Mm-hmm. It very much it spends that sort of second third of the movie kind of doing the Truman Show motions.
Yes,
where it's okay. You have the twist cracked open, and I mean, rather than explore the limits, Matthew McConaughey kind of just anguishes for a while. He does test certain limits, and he has sort of these Deus Ex Machina things come down from the heavens to stop him from leaving the island, or to the big thing towards the end is that the rules portrayed by the Ben Linus lookalike, what is this?
Jeremy Strong.
The rules, so that's the thing, is his character is a literal personification of the game's codified rules, and he's dressed like this nebbish G-man from the 50s, and he shows up basically saying the game has been changed. He wants you to kill the abusive husband, but this isn't that kind of game. There's no killing in this game. And so the rest, all of these agents of the game, whether they be additional NPCs or just freak elements of nature, are compelling Matthew McConaughey to don't kill this guy. Just keep chasing your tuna. Just keep going with your daily thing to get the tuna.
Not just compelling, but like taking action. We've got Daejo Hansu, who basically says, I paid $2,000 to break his hand, so you don't have to kill him. And it's just kind of like, oh, where exactly is this going?
Right.
So there is this sort of conspiratorial vibe that the movie sits in, well before the twist is revealed, but especially afterwards. But I was wondering, it's like, what is there for this movie without the twist, right? Like, can it survive, at least from a marketing perspective, as just a psychodrama of, like a tropically flavored psychodrama of, oh, is he gonna kill this dude, this new abusive husband? And I mean, we showed the trailer, we watched the trailer. What do you guys think? What does this movie have to offer, if not the absurd, like, glitch in the Matrix, second act twist?
I think that with both movies, it feels like they wrote the twist first and worked backwards from
For
that.
sure.
It doesn't feel like, in both cases, we talked about this a little bit with Identity. It feels like they exist for their own sake. They exist because they was coming off of, it was only a few years after, in the case of Identity, only a few years after like The Sixth Sense or other movies with big plot twists at the end. Serenity does feel like a throwback to that era, but again, like, to me, it feels like a throwback to that era by someone who didn't quite understand that era. And it's just kind of like, oh, I'm just going to throw in the sex pot stuff and some weird shit at the end, and people are going to love it.
It also does seem like McConaughey is channeling some combination of his character from True Detective and The Beach Bum, although I think The Beach Bum would come out after this.
I think it is.
Yeah. It was definitely...
But he's still very much in the mode of, like, carrying over his other performances that he was doing or studying for.
For sure.
There's a little bit of autopilot here.
Yeah. It was like Plato's Margaritaville. Like, it's just like this weird tropical, like, existential crisis movie a la Truman Show, and I agree with Brian, like, none of it works. it doesn't really make sense as a parable, especially when you consider that the moral that the film builds up to in terms of like what this game exists to help the kid process, and how it sort of exists as a piece of mediated therapy, is he builds up the courage to stab his abusive stepfather, which is, I mean, in terms of kind of like a karmic or character sense, like it makes sense, because the guy he's made out to be as villainous as possible. Right, this is
like Tyler Perry level villainy.
Oh my god!
This is like there is no redeemable quality to this abusive man, and that's on top of the additional dialogue scenes where he's just kind of like, where can I fuck underage prostitutes in the ass? It's just kind of like they just keep piling it on.
But then again, we never see what the father is like outside of the video game. That's how he's programmed by the kid. So,
when you see the kid programming the video game, like you hear him in the background,
True.
Like,
well, Matthew, to your larger question of does this work or does this have value beyond the novelty or the twist, it's that ending that kind of gums up the works for me, because it's one of those situations where I can see all the elements there. I think there's so much elements to the script and the cast that they have to get to camp or to get to something be interesting, but then it just doesn't have enough style. It just squanders a lot of those opportunities because I think it's still a first time or a second time director, or still learning how to. It's just too personal of a project, I think, for the writer director to get beyond taking it so painfully earnestly. Because, if this was done in like an Orson Welles Touch of Evil type of style, or if this was just done, like Coen Brothers, where we got a lot of those tastes and those scenes that pop out of it, I could see it popping up for much more of value beyond this, like, hey, isn't this a crazy twist? And isn't this pretty shitty for most of the way through? Type of novelty. Yet, I can't help but appreciate that it went there. I can't help but appreciate it took itself seriously enough. And it reminded me of a recent movie I saw not too long ago that just came out this year called Bliss, with Owen Wilson and Salma Hayek, that also was not a critical hit, and it carries some similar themes. I won't give the twist away here, but was directed by Mike Cahill, who did Another Earth, but is another indie director known for twists or sci-fi type of concepts. And I just think that, it's nice that they really thought that this was going to blow people's minds. And it did, but not in the way that I think that they were going to hope for.
I think that it feels very first drafty. It feels very like, we have some ideas, but we don't really want to we can't be bothered to really think them through, because we just signed Anne Hathaway, Matthew McConaughey. We gotta start filming. Like we have this window to make this movie.
It does seem like it was a short story that they were just kind of like, all right, we got the window, we got them signed. We really have to finish this fucking thing. Oh no, there's 30 extra minutes here that we did not really script out, to the point where, like, as Matthew McConaughey gets more and more frantic by the end, you start to wonder if he starts to improv some of those lines.
Oh god, yeah.
I mean, I hope so, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
I do wonder, I mean, you think of like what this would have looked like if it had a lot more of a coherent style, or if it was streamlined. And I think of a movie from, I think, the 40s called The Chase by Arthur Ripley. And it was this example of like Cuban, or not Cuban, but noir set in Havana for the large part. And it features a similar twist, where you have a large part of the movie that ends up sort of being retconned as like a fever dream or something, and it's got a lot more of a specific style going for it. It's much more of what I would call a good movie, but it doesn't give me the same, the same jouissance of watching something so painfully earnest in this way, and I keep thinking, if the movie were camped up in a deliberate way, or even if the movie were streamlined in a more stylistically coherent way, like, would I have gotten as much out of it? Part of it is, I think movies like those, I'll walk out of the theater and be like, wow, that was a really good movie. It was, maybe a little bit silly, a little bit like, expressionistic or whatever, but I really like that. Movies like this, I walk out of them and I never fucking forget them.
Yeah.
Because I sit there in the theater and just go, what in the hell? Like, there's just something about the failure aspect on all of those things that don't work, all of those weird sort of jagged pieces that don't fit together, that just lodges in my brain like nothing else. And I think it's that sort of aspect of critical failure that makes this movie and movies like it just so special to me. That and that aspect of earnestness, of weird, they threw sort of their heart and soul into this weird passion project that doesn't really make sense to anybody but the author. Phenomenal.
I'd rather have something be unforgettable than mediocre.
Yes.
I've long felt that way about most of my movies and art pieces, and this firmly falls into that category at least.
The only other movie that I could think of to compare this to when I immediately saw it was that Tom Holland and Daisy Ridley movie that came out just this past summer, Chaos
Walking. Yeah.
Another one that I went into, not exactly one that has as strong of a twist, but I went into it knowing nothing of the premise, and when they started laying out the rules of the world, I was sitting in the theater with much the same reaction to this movie, where it's just like, okay, sure, all right, this can be
just take a deep breath and
Yeah.
buckle down. You're in for a ride.
And another one similarly where they didn't really explore it very well. There's so much they could have done with that concept. For if you don't know, Chaos Walking is based on I think it's based on a series of books, of young adult books that are a sci-fi world where we've colonized a planet where for some reason the atmosphere, and this only affects men, it externalizes all of your thoughts into this visual and auditory phenomenon, but it doesn't happen to women. So there's this whole thing that you can see and hear other people's thoughts, and as a result, women have been eradicated.
Still
it's
a PG-13 movie, so they're really not going to show
It also just
what might be true there.
It's just so bizarre.
That premise just sounds like a person that like I can't figure out how to write teenage boys, so I'm just gonna like completely literalize it.
I feel like that's the Hunger Games scenario, where it's
Yeah.
just like a lot of these young adult novels and things are the sci-fi like hook and twist, and so is this, and I generally love high concept sci-fi. The worse the better, even in my opinion, and I think it fits in this. I also think it fits into what I think what we call the Occurrence on Owl Creek Bridge movies, which is
right.
the it was all a dream, it was all this, the rug pull type of things. Identity had it, but that one took much more of the murder mystery. This one I think falls much more into like the Jacob's Ladder, the other type of approach of like, this isn't the world that you're really living in. You're somebody else in this body or someplace else right before death. Mm-hmm. But again, it's so strange that this movie doubles down on that murder is good. Like, that was the last rug pull for me, where I was just kind of like, okay, we can kind of see where this is all going. But then, it takes this act that I would think for how much hand-wringing and moralizing this movie does, it would have taken that more seriously to be kind of like, this is a bad thing that you did, but maybe it was necessary. But the movie gives itself a round of applause.
Like I said, they both get that rousing emotional ending where he's like running down the dock.
Mm-hmm. And he makes the new game, and so it all like the digital swirls around him, which reminds me of the movie that Brian wouldn't let us talk about, which I don't know if we'll get to cover one day. But when we were originally thinking through pairings for Serenity, I brought up The 13th Floor, a much forgotten and I don't think much loved film with Craig Bierko that was a Matrix ripoff that also took its time way too long to show that its 30s noir world was a fake computer world, and then it had one more twist that the world that they were living in was also computer world. And so, it's a long line of those kind of janky type of movies.
I'm glad we landed on Serenity over the 13th Floor. Like I told you, we will get to Craig Bierko when we do So Long Kiss Goodnight.
That's right.
I'd just like to add that I think another sort of element, when you think of this long lineage of, are we living in a simulation? Like that has been explored in so many movies. That one, The Matrix, World on a Wire. God, there was even just a horrible documentary recently that I think was at Sundance, Glitch in the Matrix. Did you guys see this one?
No.
My friend and I watched this the other night. It's the funniest fucking documentary you've ever seen because it's
It's just assholes being assholes.
Essentially,
and explaining why they're assholes. Because
essentially,
they believe they're the only person in the world, right?
You nailed it. But, so this concept exists in so many different iterations, and I'm trying to think through, what makes this movie special. The twist of, it's all a simulation isn't exactly groundbreaking, it's not earth-shattering, and it's not particularly edgy anymore. But I think what really does it for this movie is that it's not just a simulation, it's a fucking video game. It is a Grand Theft Auto clone, and they really make sure that that the sun is not just coating like a Second Life like simulation thing. He's not like running an experiment or anything. He's making a fucking video game.
A real video game. He's putting in the time to put the pixels in his father's penis.
And there's something so like weirdly specific and juvenile and trivial about that. And they even kind of capitalize on the aesthetics in some small cases too. Max, you mentioned how in your little trivia hunting, they said that they modeled the map of Plymouth Island after sort of the typesetting and the sort of general cartography of the Grand Theft Auto maps.
This is Grand Theft
Grand
Island.
Theft Island, exactly. And but I mean, also there's some shots early on that are like way too obvious if you already know what the twist is, where Matthew McConaughey will be like walking down a path and the camera won't move around him. It'll sort of like shift its center as you would if you like press the shoulder buttons in a video game where the camera is locked to not rotation.
RZ,
yeah, exactly.
LZ,
so
yeah.
it's like you're watching a third-person shooter or something, and so it does sort of play with these weird sort of ludic virtual aesthetics in a way that seems completely dissonant and incoherent with the moody sort of spiritualist like neo-noir thing that it's doing. So I think that's part of why I fucking adore this movie so much is it's easier to make the simulation question at least feel deep and sort of dignified. It's so much harder to do it when you package it in the "this is a video game" question.
And I think it's tough just because then it's just the age of the people who created this start to show themselves a bit, where this is just like, well, this is obviously a 50 or 60-year-old man that's thinking through this of being like any kid that would spend his time. I mean, just the Freudian implications of all of this alone are already crazy and icky enough. But let alone that this is what would keep his attention all this time. Except weirdly that the movie, kind of hints that both, or that he might be on the spectrum, or that Matthew McConaughey's characters too, or maybe those were just poor acting choices.
It's really
there's a lot of things in bad taste in this film too.
Max, you and I, before we even started watching the movie, when we were talking about Identity, we talked about how we kind of looked up the twist before ever seeing it. Honestly, in my case, not really ever expecting to see it. And I did find myself sort of thinking, like, God, I almost wish I didn't know.
Yeah.
And I was just going to ask, like, if you felt the same way, or if.
Me too. I was actually a little ashamed of myself because I think for years and years I've read every review before I saw a movie.
Yeah.
That not only like gave away most of the information, but it would also kind of shape my opinion almost before I even saw a movie. I went into The Sixth Sense with it being spoiled.
Oh,
I'm
really?
somebody who doesn't mind spoilers. I think it's well known. But I've been trying to do better over the last couple of years because you know what, it can be a special experience to go into something not knowing anything about it, or something that starts to get a reputation. And so that one, I think we both read the same A. Dowd AV Club article that teased us too much to be kind of like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
So you might be interested. And I think back when the AV Club still had good articles and things where it had spoiler space, I think we clicked that button and it sounded I really wish I maybe had saved it for myself for an experience like this so I could watch it with other type of people, because that's the best way to watch bad movies, with alcohol and weed and a group of people. But also reading that, it created a much wilder movie in my mind than I just watched, I think, though, too.
Yeah.
I do think when I just read, like, holy shit, it's a video game and it's this, and he, like, has his naked father and this, I think it was much more of a camp classic or a cult classic in my mind, made up than what I just witnessed, which was, again, is kind of like almost more straightforward, more earnest than I had ever expected something that had this much boldness to actually pull off.
Go ahead.
No.
I was just gonna say it is more restrained than you would expect based on the concept. There's really only one scene where the movie really plays with visually this, so the consequence of this being a virtual world, that is towards the end where the son is rewriting the game and it's sort of materially deconstructing itself in this 360 shot all around Matthew McConaughey. But yeah, I mean, for what it is, it's weirdly stuck in its genre confines. It doesn't really play too much with the, at least visually, with the rules of the game.
Which just makes me think that it feels so much more of like that short story or a first draft type of... Because, I mean, just watching Identity again, like, that puts its foot on the motherfucking gas and does not let up for its 90 minutes, whereas this one, is a very leisurely hour 40, especially with these kind of mind-blowing concepts.
I will say, though, that I don't know that I would have... Like I said, I watching the movie, I found myself sort of wishing I didn't know the ending But I have to say that I don't know that I would have been as willing to sort of go back and look at it and talk about it had I not known the ending. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I do think, because like I said, we chose this movie because you're in town and it's one you've been trying to do for a while. But I think that if I didn't know anything about it and I didn't know the twist, I would have been I probably would have been well, we can find something else. But I think knowing about that twist and how that lends its appeal is what prompted me to watch it in the first place. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
So I almost wouldn't have watched it if I didn't know the ending.
Well, and this was something, Matthew, you were bringing up, is just this wasn't this long ago. Obviously, it was 2019, but it was also a big flop. Identity made some money. Critics liked it a bit better. This one was reviled and then went to an early demise. So again, who is this movie for? Well, you brought up that maybe it is a Netflix movie. We're starting to see more of these type of neo-noirs pop up. What was the last one with Julianne Moore and Amy Adams, The Woman in the Window? I'm starting to think of kind of these scripts are starting to end up in Netflix, or some more of these twisty type of ones, but are being done cheaper, more mediocre, not getting any type of settling on this type of algorithm-based, half camp, half taken seriously type of mush that doesn't interest me.
Right.
Whereas at least this one, it's got a vision. It's not a great vision, but it's got a vision.
It's it just makes me think of the Bart Simpson gif with the cake, and it's at least I tried.
It does seem like something that is almost tailor-made for just the Netflix deluge of original content, and that it would be something that would really be propelled by one person even posting about it on Twitter, being here's this weird fucking thing that I found in Netflix's most recent flood of original releases. Can we talk about how strange and high concept this is? And it's a movie that I feel wouldn't have been noticed at all if it, well, I don't know if it went viral, but if it did go viral, that is really all of the numbers that it was going to get from box office. That's why I'm so interested in this question of, in both of the movies, aside from the twist, and if you go in not even knowing, put aside not knowing what the twist is, not even knowing that there is a twist, is there something to bring you, butts in seats for this movie? For Identity, I think definitely. There is a solid slasher sort of mystery there that the twist is just icing on the cake. It's a lot of fucking icing, but it's just fantastic. And with Serenity, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. And films like that for Identity, Your Next is a modern, I think a closer example. That's a sturdy concept, and Agatha Christie and things aren't going away, or a big cast when it comes to that. But Serenity, we were trying to think, is there anything closer to what this movie was trying to accomplish, more modern? Because they took this to film festivals. They really did think that this was going to be a hit, or this was going to blow people's minds. And what we were discussing is that it might be closer to Lee Daniels and audiences that are much more comfortable with tonal shifts and much more comfortable with melodrama being right by the side of camp or comedy or other things. Lee Daniels' Paperboy was in my head a lot while watching this, where something that's clearly bad taste, but is obviously being but it's literature. I'm doing Old Man and the Sea. We're doing poetry here. We're taking this seriously. And, good for them. I'm glad. I will always remember a Lee Daniels movie, and I won't remember A Woman in the Window, 2 weeks from now.
I did see The Woman in the Window, and I don't think I could tell you the first thing about it.
No, I mean, those where it's just kind of wow, that's just an easy Rear Window ripoff, and you've got nothing else going for you other than this looks semi-expensive and it will waste somebody's 2 hours on Netflix because you're tired of looking for something.
Yeah.
Whereas this, I enjoy you got to seek this out.
There really just is something so charming about the failure, knowing that there was, there can be no franchising, there can be no sort of victory laps at Sundance or anything. It's just a lot of audacity that amounts to nothing, and you just don't see that anymore because risks don't get taken in this kind of way. And so when you do get that rare chance where you see such a total fucking misfire that is a misfire because it's so bold, I mean, you gotta take those. Like, those are the best.
Yeah, it reminds me of the old Nathan Rabin system of My Year of Flops, which
the
is
fiasco,
the flop, the
yeah.
fiasco, and the secret success. I can't call this a secret success, but I will happily call it a fiasco, which is so much better than a flop, because it will continue to be fascinating. And I hope we'll learn more stories. There'll be a retrospective where they ask him questions in Vice 5 years from now, because this is like, it's got its own secret cult in LA, like The Room, and we start throwing fishing lures, or everybody brings giant fishing rods so they can hold it by their crotch.
Well, when Matthew McConaughey is the mayor of the Tampa Bay Autonomous Zone, maybe there will be people who have the cojones to ask him about this movie, but, you know, one can only hope.
See, I really hope that this one will be one that, like, has just enough of weirdos for a cult that, like, talk to him and tell him that that's their favorite movie, because, like, that's what he did to Martin Short when I told him Clifford was my favorite of his movies, and he said, oh, that's much too kind. So you gotta weird out some of your favorite actors by picking their weirdest stuff.
I actually think this is a movie, both of these movies are movies that would really actually benefit from being on Netflix or on, like, on Hulu, and because, you know, whenever it's new, you know, it gets advertised, and then, like, I think that it's waiting to be discovered in this weird way.
I think it's waiting to be discovered, like, at the bottom of Tubi or Hulu.
Yeah.
We just found it on Amazon Prime. It's for free right now.
Yeah.
But I do think it's one that will benefit in 5 years' time for, like, the small theater at the Music Box.
Yeah,
like,
just
like this one, just like Identity, would would be much more enjoyable with a crowd.
Yeah.
That you can look around and just be kind of like, what the fuck?
Yeah. No, like I said, I've seen Identity more times than I can count, because, like, I always found it on TV or whatever. I will certainly watch it again at some point. Serenity, I'm not as sure. I don't know. So much of it just didn't work for me, and so much of it, I think, was sort of off-putting. Also, I'm not a big Matthew McConaughey fan. I'm a gay man, so I have to love Anne Hathaway, and I do. I think she's fantastic. And she's my favorite performance in the movie, but also that I can't imagine that this is a movie I'm gonna, like, seek out years from now.
Anne Hathaway is so good in this movie.
She's got a good wig in this.
Yeah.
And those are some nice costumes, too. Although, Matthew, you and I were talking, we were like, we wanted to be, like, almost a little bit more noir or a little bit more Barbara Stanwyck. Maybe some shoulder pads in there, but then that probably would have played the hand too much.
Well, there's all of these strange moments where you see almost, this stylistic dealing of the cards. Anne Hathaway, when she's introduced for the first time when she walks into the bar, is that her first introduction?
Yep.
Yeah.
She walks in
with the blue on the ring.
Yeah, she waves her hand, and there's this total CGI glint added to her ring, and
the camera lurches around her in that first-person, video game camera.
It's outstanding, and it's the only entrance she deserves.
And she's the only one with a consistent accent. So, again, I do think that makes her the best actor in this film.
Yeah.
Out of the bad performances that are here.
That's true.
She has been in bad movies, but she's never been bad in anything.
She came close in The Witches, too. Let's say our girl...
I didn't see that.
Our girl's had a hard couple of the last years. Let's hope a good
Witches.
project's coming her way
I didn't
soon.
see The Witches, but I will grant you that.
But this was both her and Matthew McConaughey's first movie since Interstellar. So this was a reunion.
That's right.
That we covered.
Yeah. Well, Matthew is apparently our... Of course, you're our Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah, so you got your fill on this one. I will say, again, he's not generally my type either, Brian, or not much of, Magic Mike does it for me, but, like, this camera loves him, and it kind of worked. That clinging, wet, white shirt, his butt, like, looked quite right, in the water.
Yeah,
it was working.
Exactly the same way. I have never felt a single tremor of attraction to Matthew McConaughey before I saw this movie. There really just is something contagious about how the camera films him.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
It's such a horny movie for not being sexy in any way.
Yeah.
Any way.
Well, like Paul Verhoeven films are the same way. They're very horny, but they're not sexy.
You're right. Uh-huh. Now that would have been a director who had been able to make a meal out of this script.
Yes.
But then again, he probably would have leaned very hard on the black comedy.
Yeah. Also, again, I don't know, but this is a movie that needs, like, Sharon Stone and Michael Douglas, and them just kind of just throwing it out there.
Paul Verhoeven would have made a lot more of the sort of tossed aside fact that Matthew McConaughey's real character died in Iraq. That would have been much more of a plot point.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that
would become an anti-war film by then. It would have been an anti-Iraq war film. Well, again, which is, Brian, to your point.
Well, No, I was just going to say that I forgot that. I'm glad you mentioned that because I wanted to bring that up because it was one of those things that, to me, sort of made me feel like they were trying to give McConaughey's character that big hero's moment ending. And part of, I think that they thought, like, oh, if he died in Afghanistan, or was it, I don't remember if it was Afghanistan, Iraq. So if he died in Iraq, then it'll automatically, people will feel sorry for him. And he's being reunited with his son, people will love it, right? Like, because he's a soldier, and he gave the ultimate sacrifice. But it doesn't earn that.
Well, and it also takes the ultimate sacrifice, and so, is it almost a conservative movie by the end? Is a little bit of, my confusion, where it's just, like, the doubles down on murder's good if you're killing bad guys. And then this kind of Iraq worship...
Or the good guy with the gun.
Yeah, the Iraq War and the Purple Heart worship by the end of the film is just like, is that what you're doing? Like, I would think any movie at this point would look at nothing but the Iraq War, but a really bad thing that America did, or that, really screwed over soldiers, rather than a reminder of, like, you died and then your son carried on your legacy by still killing bad guys. But it doesn't seem to be making that point, but it leaves it open for that interpretation.
I don't think it's necessarily, like, about the Iraq War as much as it's like, oh, it's a soldier.
Yeah.
Who died at war.
Right.
I think war. Right, it's the modern war. I don't think there's any specific politicization of it being the Iraq War. I think it's just he was a soldier that died.
Well, what's so weird, too, is the sort of valor of killing. It makes almost a sort of sense in the sort of overstory of what is happening in the real world, and that the son sort of gets this, David and Goliath victory over his abusive stepfather.
Mm-hmm.
But in the world of the video game, the way that they finally take out the... what is the actor's actual name? Because I'm going to say
Jason Clarke.
I was going to say Jason Alexander again.
We had a good laugh on that one.
The way that they take him out is they basically just drug him. They get him incredibly drunk to the point that he's barely, conscious, and they... they basically Weekend at Bernie's him.
We were yelling at the screen at that point. Somebody had paid to break his hand. He wasn't going. At that point, he was so fucked up they could have just tipped him over and he'd be dead at the dock rather than keep going with this plan. And then who the fuck is Samson who joins? We get this Denny from The Room character who's just kind of like, hi, it's Diane Lane's character's son. I had to re-ask you, Matthew. But then he pops up at the boat of by the way, I'm a stowaway. And we know that this is supposed to be this bug in the video game. To be kind of all right, you still got to do it.
Yeah.
I feel like I wanted that character to be played by Ben Foster.
Well, ostensibly he's there to make sure that they go through with the letter of the law thing of actually because their whole thing is they have to stage it as though it was an accident.
The
right?
fish had to kill him.
The plan, right, is that they put him in this fishing harness where the pole is strapped to your chest for stability.
Except it's straight to his dick.
Yeah, and it's coming right out of his crotch. But they strap him up to this thing, and then they're gonna let him go, so the fish wheels him away into the abyss. And that was always the plan, and that's what ends up happening. But by the point that they execute it, he's so doped up and unresponsive, and they make a point of saying the one policeman on the island is out of town. They could have just brought him over to the pier and just pushed him into the shallow water and walked away. So I feel like that Samson character is there to sort of reinstate some iota of sense or logic into what their plan actually is, because if they have a witness, they have to actually still abide by, McConaughey keeps saying out loud, oh, did you hear that? He's verbally expressed his consent that he wants to go fishing, so we're just going to let him do that.
Strangely, extraordinarily legal for something that's supposed to be based off of Grand Theft Auto. It's just I've played that game. You can kill people 700 different ways. It's the point of the game.
And that's what we were saying when they were on the boat with Samson, or it's it's a video game, dude. Just kill Samson, too. You understand that this isn't a real person, and the way that Samson is introduced is he's supposed to be this arbitrary Deus Ex Machina thing, where he shows up almost magically to follow up on a loose end that was briefly mentioned at the beginning, where one of the women on the island that Matthew McConaughey beds, she says, oh, well, if you need an extra hand, I've got my son up in Miami or something. And then he magically comes through when McConaughey's trying to leave as sort of this force to keep him on the island and to keep him fishing. So it's very clear from the beginning that he's not a real person.
Mm-hmm.
He's an extension of the rules. So, yeah, if it's a video game, just kill him too. Fuck it.
Hey, Anne Hathaway tried. Anne Hathaway tried.
Oh, Lord.
Well, thank you for bringing this movie to our attention, Matthew. like I said, it was not something I ever really intended. And excuse me, it was not something I ever planned on seeing. But I'm glad I did because it's something else.
And side by side with Identity, this was a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's been a while since we've intentionally covered bad movies.
yeah, absolutely. And also, it's been a while since we recorded in person, so this has been awesome. Like we said earlier, we had pizza and we've been eating Doritos, and yeah, it's been a great night. Does anybody have a say something gay? I feel like I know what both of yours are, but I'm gonna.
Well, Matthew, you were already saying, but this is just a male gaze film in Serenity. But I will say, when I say something gay about it, was I really did find Jeremy Strong cute. Like, I always kind of liked the Benjamin Linus look and his little, like, oval glasses and complete fish out of water appearance.
Suit and tie. Like, close cropped
on
hair,
this perfect island. He was cute.
I guess my say something gay about it is, aside from just being tickled pink that Alfred Molina was in Identity, because I forgot he was in that, and I have a long-standing crush on Alfred Molina, which I think I made clear the last episode too. I don't remember why, but
it comes up a lot.
It certainly does.
He was in Promising Young Woman.
Oh, so a couple episodes back,
and that was when I learned of your crush.
That's right,
on Alfred Molina.
He's a handsome man. Anyway, Ray Liotta in Identity was almost unrecognizable to me because I was so used to seeing him with his weird kind of boxy face that he has now. And it's still there in this movie, but young Ray Liotta, or younger Ray Liotta, is, like, really attractive. And I was just blindsided by that. Yeah, and I mean, aside from just the rest with Serenity, though I say something gay about Serenity is the whole fucking movie, so that's kind of it for me.
Yeah, I honestly, I gotta give props to Clea Duvall, even though I didn't like her movie Happiest Season. I've been a fan of hers forever, and I am always happy to see her show up in a movie, whether it's a movie from 2003 or earlier or later. Also in Girl Interrupted.
Yes,
James
Mangold. So
yeah.
James Mangold was a big fan too. Hey, I just realized, is this literally our third Killer Kid movie in a row that we've just watched and talked through together? Because we got a little bit of Poison and the patricide into that, and then we both have the child being our murderer, and that's the big old twist in both of these.
Yeah, well, that was, again, like, when we talked about pairing these movies and talking about these movies, the twist was, I feel like, one of the things we talked about, where it was like, oh, it's all these, like, it's like this, this crazy killer kid twist movie. Like, that was one of the kind of things we talked about, like, in terms of just pairing these together.
Well, we're on quite a roll. We're going to have to think of some new ones.
I know, and as of this recording, I don't know what we're doing next, but we'll figure that out. But thank you so much, guys, for coming on. Matthew, it was great to get you in person while you're in town.
Great to finally meet you.
Thank
you both for indulging my Serenity session. That means a lot to me, and I will be handing out pamphlets next.
Hand out stickers. You have stickers.
That's right.
Do you want to hit us with your social media?
Sure. I am at RatJacko, RatJacko on Twitter and Letterboxd.
And I'm at Max Bever on Instagram.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I am Brian Rowe on Instagram, Twitter, and Letterboxd. You can find the podcast on Piece of Pie Pod on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. So give us a like, give us a follow. Please leave us a rating on iTunes or whatever podcast app you're using. Yeah, we'll be back at you in a couple weeks with a new episode, and movie theaters are opening, so please go see a movie this week, and we'll see you soon. Bye.